it's time that we get working on these two tanks. Not this one first. First, as you can see in the background, we're doing brother-in-law James's tank. Originally, we were going to move some of the angelfish from up here down here, but because my male-female pair passed away, and one of my fish is kind of exhibiting some things that would lead me to think that I'm not going to have him too much longer, we're actually going to leave the angels in this tank. And instead, we're going to figure out some different livestock. But before we do that, let's first look at the hardscape before I did any planting. Now, this was shot on my cell phone. It's nothing too crazy. It was while I was filling a minimal amount of water. I like having some amount of water in the tank when I do planting, and I was in charge of planting the tank, as should be obvious, but some of the plant selection was done with brother-in-law James with me, where we were buying plants. And there were some specific things he definitely wanted in this tank, whether it was for the angels or anything else. So there's the hardscape. You can see it was while I was filling water, just to give you a brief idea. I mean, obviously you're going to see it, but let's go ahead and do a little tour of all the plants in the tank and talk about what brother-in-law James specifically wanted, what we planted where, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what we're doing in the future with this tank.
Okay, so here we are at the tank, and you can see it post-planting. We'll kind of do a little overview here first. See the intake of the FX6. I kind of had to bury it a little bit back there. Then we've got the spray bar. I do need to adjust it. It probably needs to go up just a little bit inside the tank to get a little more surface agitation, just so you can kind of see. We'll kind of come up the top. You can see it's got kind of minimal agitation. I want just a little bit more. But let's go through it. So along the front, we'll zoom in real fast. So along the front, you can see we've got crypt parva kind of planted throughout here. And then behind it, you'll see a bunch of Liliopsis braziliensis, or microsword. This is kind of like the biggest chunk here. I split my pots up into a lot of really small pieces. Got a nice tiger lotus here. This is something that brother-in-law James specifically wanted. So he had this cool hole in this big piece of rock as his primary stone, and he immediately wanted to put a lily in it. So we got that. Then you see just a little bit more of the Liliopsis right here in the back behind the parva. And then along the back is a whole bunch, and there's way more than you can see because the rock covers a lot. But that's all Crypt Wendetii green. And we've got up front here the most obvious of the two, and then one more back here. Those are both flame swords. Those are something that brother-in-law James specifically picked out. So when we were picking plants, I picked the crypt green and parva to give him some carpeting, but he really wanted the flame swords and the lily to make sure that he had what he wanted. And I'll try and go top down a little bit. It might be harder to see just because of the water reflection, and the light certainly doesn't help. But you can kind of see there is quite a bit of crypts back there. We're just using a brand new aquarium co-op light. I had an extra one lying around, so we're going to use that one to light this tank. Right now it's sitting at 70%, and that's mostly for filming purposes. It'll probably get dialed down to about 50%. Just as this tank settles in. So pretty simple, right? Lots of substrate. We can see we've got a fairly deep substrate here until we get to like this back corner where you might be able to see it, but like I kind of had to dig a cavity for the FX2's intake to fit, but yeah, this is brother-in-law James's tank. I think he did a really great job on the hardscape. He wanted something kind of simple. He wasn't trying to do something too crazy. But he's got this big, beautiful feature stone right here, and then some detail stones. And I added a couple extra small stones just to give some extra detail through here. But you can see we didn't go like too nuts. It's not like we have lots of little pebbly stones and stuff. We want to try and let these plants grow in. And also notice like the bulb right there for the tiger lily. It broke off when I was pulling it out of the pot, but it's still heavy. So with nymphaeas in general, if they have a bulb and the bulb still sits at the bottom, it still has weight to it, eventually it will grow a new plant if the old plant has broken off of it. Typically, when they start to get light enough to where they float, usually then they're dead and they won't do that anymore. We've got the two swords. They're going to be our kind of other red accent over on this part of the tank in the back. Lots of green. He wanted to have a bigger focus on green planting and minimal red plants. So I asked him if he wanted like some big splashes of red, like Alternanthera renekii, and no, he wanted more green. So that's going to be the tank. We're going to let it grow in. I think we'll hook up some CO2 to this tank just like we did on Fallen Forest. But we'll go back to my face and we'll kind of explain what the process is from here.
I hope you enjoyed the little tour walking around. It's pretty simple, right? It's not a huge, diverse number of plants. We're looking at one sword, 2 types of crypts, a lily, and a microsword. That's it. 5 species of plants in this tank. We talked a little bit, brother-in-law James and I, that is, about whether or not he wanted some, like, Java Fern or Boos and Anubias, things like that. And originally, he wanted to use some needle-leaf Java Fern. But after he did some of his hardscaping, we didn't have, like, obvious places to kind of tuck the Java Fern without then trying to figure out, like, some gluing or something else. So I kind of went through and said, hey, just let me plant it first with the stuff that we know is going to go in the substrate. And then we can look at it and decide, do we want to add anything? Do we want to let it grow a little bit and see how it looks as it grows out? And then maybe add some things. So there's a chance that we add some, probably more likely, Anubias and Boos into this tank, as opposed to any Java Ferns, because I think over time everything else is going to grow tall or short, medium, kind of where we want it to be. And places where we would like a little bit of Java Fern is probably not going to end up being that impactful or that interesting, because other plants will kind of take over, really flesh out, and take over the space. So more than likely what we're looking at is, this is kind of close to the final planting. Eventually, I think as we let it grow in, we'll see some changes, and we'll want to add like some Anubias or Boos or something like that to a few of the rocks. And I can already see some spots where I'm like, that'd be a good spot for this, or that'd be a good spot for that, right? But these are decisions I'm going to let brother-in-law James make. This is his aquascape. And while the fish that we're going to put in here are a little my influence, I wanted to let him have fun and aquascape this. Now, he's got his other small tank that's been going for quite a while. We've done a number of updates on it. We'll have a link into the corner of that. But he's also going to do another tank for himself, probably at some point throughout this summer. We're trying to figure some stuff out. We got all sorts of things going on around the house, but he's going to inherit one of my old 20-gallon longs, and he kind of has an idea of a small betta sorority that he wants to do, because brother-in-law James really loves bettas. I don't know if we've made this obvious by the fact that he's had bettas in his 15-gallon tank. This, not really suitable for a betta sorority. We need more plant density, lots of hiding spots, stuff like that, where this is going to be some kind of schooling fish. We haven't decided exactly what, but we'll figure that out. Now, let's talk about the next future steps, right? First off, there's, you guys have seen on a couple of my tanks, like you can kind of see it on the angel tank behind me a little bit. It's a little out of frame, but there are risers that are made by a person on Etsy that made risers for the Fluval 3.0 plant lights that has also made them for the aquarium co-op lights. So I'm going to get probably 2 different heights. One for the anoxic filtration tank, which is over that way, and then one for brother-in-law James's tank here, to kind of just raise the light up a little bit on a 40-gallon breeder, just because of how wide they are front to back, and with the distance that the light spans, I've found that it tends to help to raise those lights up just a little bit, whether it's the Fluvels or the Aquarium Co-op light, to give just a little bit better light dispersion across the tank. We're sitting at about, I think it's 60% light. I mean, it's 70% for filming right now, but we're going to try 50% to start, right? Because these plants need to settle in. They have been sitting in other tanks, so they are mostly converted already. We don't have to worry about conversion, but they do need to kind of adjust to the different parameters. The parameters in Fallen Forest are much different than the parameters in this brand new tank. So they need to kind of do that adjustment, settle in, build nice root structures, and then we'll start seeing the big growth kick in. We'll kind of catalyst that. We're going to set up some CO2 on this tank. I do have an extra CO2 regulator. I actually could probably just run from my CO2 that's over that way, but I might steal one of my 2 tanks and move it kind of over into this corner and put some CO2 here, or potentially the CO2 that is going to run on this tank can have an extra manifold and run both of these tanks, which I think is probably the eventual actual solution. But for right now, I'm going to temporarily set up some early CO2 just to help kickstart the growth in this thing. Let it cycle. We've got the FX2 doing its thing. I do have the FX2 dialed down on its output to about 60%. When I first powered it on, it was kind of like a whirlwind tornado going in here, and I was a little worried I would uproot a number of the freshly planted crypts that had some smaller root structures, or some of that microsort, because it does have very small root structure to start. So it's kind of like, yeah, let's dial it back. And I've kind of watched the movement of the water, and I think it's good for a specific type of fish I have in mind. A stream fish. But not like full-on crazy river biotope, although maybe that might be where we go. But I've talked to brother-in-law James about this. One of brother-in-law James's favorite colors is yellow. And this fish happens to have a very prominent bit of yellow on it. I've shown him pictures of the fish, and he was kind of into it. So I'll let you guys in the comments guess down below, what fish do you think we're putting in this tank? Could be fun, right? Now, a reminder that we'll be doing my wife's tank next. This is that really nice water box setup that I got that has like fancy boy lighting, and it's going to have an Oase filter and kind of all the bells and whistles. The background actually lights up. I mean, this is a crazy tank. This is going to be probably the most display intentional tank in my entire house, because normally what I go for is not necessarily like hardcore aquascape. I mean, you can notice that like this tank, when we walk through it, it's kind of functional, right? But we're looking to let the plants do their thing. A little bit of hardscape or stuff to get kind of a feel, or maybe just something that is appeasing to us and has some benefit to the fish. But also, you know, we like more letting the plants do their thing. And you can see that in like Fallen Forest, right? Where that tank has really grown. Or like even this tank, this has no hardscape in it. This is all just one plant that is slowly grown in. This is all Crypt Pontoderifolia. I just said that really weird. I don't know why. Crypt Pontoderifolia. I went folia? I don't know, man. But you can see as it grows in, it builds this really cool bushy effect, and the angels can swim above it. I've got some stems floating that are going to be used over here. But it's one plant, and yet it looks really cool. And if you looked at it like, say, 2 years ago, when I only had like a couple of these in here, versus now where this plant is going crazy, it's taken over this whole tank. Eventually I probably have to move the plecos because they're kind of getting squeezed out. They can move in between them, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of funny to see these big bristle-nosed wabbaboosters whipping around through it every once in a while. But that's kind of what we want to do. That's the style that I like. I like letting plants do their thing and kind of allowing a lightly aquascaped but more nature doing its thing. The jungle style aquarium, as some might call this. That's kind of my style. It's certainly not here to win a competition, but what I care about is making a great environment for my fish and having something that when I look at it, I see nice, lush, healthy plants, and I get to enjoy it, and my fish get to live in a nice, healthy setup. CO2 risers on this. We're going to let the FX2 do its thing and just kind of gauge it at that about 60% output power, because we've dialed on the valve to make sure, and that's something Fluval does specifically say as long as it is 50% or more, you should not damage the pump by restricting it on the output valve with the flow stop, right? So that's good. We can kind of chill the flow down. We are dispersing it a little using that spray bar. I do need to raise that spray bar up a little just because it's a little too low. Bad guesswork on my behalf setting things up. Who'd thunk, right? But really what it is a little CO2, some light. I think we're going to do about 8 hours of light a day. Maybe we'll dial that down to like 6 to start, just to try to minimize the likelihood of algae. We do have a lot of like root feeding, slower growing plants in this tank in general. We don't have any really crazy growers, so we want to try and minimize the potential for algae early. I need to get a Wi-Fi timer on this thing just to control that perfectly. Right now it doesn't have a Wi-Fi timer, it's all manual. But I literally planted it like a day ago, so it's just getting going. All right, gang. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know, what do you like the most about the tank? Is there something you think is missing from it? You have maybe a plant suggestion for brother-in-law James to help give it a little oomph? Or maybe you just like it as it is, or maybe you like, oh, you just add like a couple of this plant here and there, or maybe just like, oh, it needs one more sword, whatever the heck it may be. Let me know in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you can get all the updates on this tank, all the updates on this upcoming tank, and some other changes we're going to be making on the fish room, because eventually we're going to do a little bit of work here in the angelfish aquarium with the Leopoldi angels. Probably need to do some serious maintenance on Running River over there, because that Java fern has gone crazy and kind of overgrown. And eventually we're going to be doing a proper fish room tour once we have all these tanks rolling, the anoxic experiment doing its thing, or not doing its thing. Who knows? We'll see. Time will tell. But yeah, that's it. We've got lots of stuff to look forward to. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.